Available to podcast at facebook.com/offtheball.
And just saying, it is still Thursday night. We are going to talk to Keith Wood. Good evening, Keith.
It feels like a Wednesday. That's the way I would think. But
no, the weekend is upon us, Keith. It's fine.
No, Thursday isn't the weekend either.
Almost,
I'm sorry.
Almost. Liam Toland, how are you?
I'm very good. Why would you have anything on a Wednesday and ruin 2 weekends? So it's always better to do it on a Thursday.
I didn't realise we had you. I do love this shot all the time inside Liam Toland's house. In your very relaxed of a Thursday. You're as relaxed of a Thursday evening as you are of a Wednesday evening.
Well, I feel like Mayor Quimby. If the camera panned back a little bit, you'd notice that I'm on the foothills of Connemara or something with sheep pottering around in front of me.
I thought you were going to say, you'd know, if we pan back a bit, you'd notice I wasn't wearing any pants, which would be a little bit awkward. Anyways, this has been a strange start to Thursday Night Rugby. This is why they generally keep it on Wednesday nights. Keith, what was your reaction when Andre Conway somehow claimed that ball over his head and set off in his mazy run?
I will admit, and I hope my insurers aren't listening, I actually felt for the first time I had a pain in my heart. I got so excited by it. It was incredible. It was just down in front of where I was sitting. I felt Munster had something else, but it was one of those great days. I said actually before the game, we had a group of people before the game, and I thought because of Toulon's strength and depth and size, and because of Munster's injury list, I thought this would go down as the best of the wins that Munster could have had. I mean, I thought everything had to go their way for them to win it. And then when we got to the ground, and you can actually see the Toulon players up close, they just are huge. I mean, it's it's great watching rugby on the television, but when you see it really up close and you see the size, the speed, and some of the hits of these players, it's pretty awe-inspiring actually. And I just thought it was monumental. It was a great day from start to finish. It is one of the great days in Thomond Park.
Back when you were playing, Keith, if you came up against players like that and of that size, can it freak you out?
It doesn't freak you out as much. I don't think that's the phrase. You tend to be a little bit more evasive, and I wouldn't have been the most. I'd been quite happy to run over somebody if they got in my way. But when you see and play against really big guys, you just want to get out of their way. I mean, for me, it was definitely some of the French, some of the Argentinians, some of the South Africans, or especially Samoans, because at that particular time, having arms in the tackle wasn't really necessary, and they could launch from 15 yards, and if you sidestepped them, you got 10 yards behind them. If you didn't, you were out for the count. So it just you have to be kind of preserve yourself a little bit more, would have been my view, which is exactly not what Munster did. And especially from Keatley, Scannell and Arnold, their tackling performance, defensive performance was astounding.
As always, when Munster have a win like this, Keith, we sort of get into the mysticism of it and that it's something magical about Munster that they produce performances like this. But there on the day when you watch the way that they somehow managed to hold into the game for the first 25 minutes or so and then grind out that victory at the end, are you seeing signs when you look at Munster of what Johan van Graan is trying to achieve?
I think you are. I think there's a little bit more invention in Munster this season. I think the players that are further down the pecking order are playing at a much higher standard, I have to say. And I think they look like a really good team. And they're a very hard team to beat, especially in Thomond Park. I don't know that style is sustainable for a season. I think it probably is too damaging to players' bodies over a season. And I think when you look at Leinster and Leinster's performance, it's a more sophisticated version of what Munster have. Yes, they still have the heart and they still have a really, really good defensive system, but there's more subtlety in the Leinster style, and I think they're a couple of years ahead of Munster, maybe 3 years ahead of Munster at the moment, in terms of being able to replicate this week in, week out. Now, that doesn't mean that Munster won't go ahead and do some really good things, or that Leinster will have everything their own way, but that's just the way it looks at for me. But I'd go back to the injuries. The amount of players that were out injured, in the centre in particular, where Munster had struggled, like 18 months ago, Munster were struggling heavily in the centre. Then they got Jaco Taute and Chris Farrell in subsequently afterwards. They've done a really, really good job. Rory Scannell has been almost the consistent guy in the centre, and he is the most unheralded player in Irish rugby, but he delivers every time he plays. And Munster were also missing Keith Earls. And Keith Earls has been Munster's best player, I would say, this season. And I really worried about missing his spark, his ability to get to the try line. And so how the team pulled together, I think that's a really good sign of a coaching ticket that has managed to pull the team together.
Liam, they go to play a Racing 92 in Bordeaux now in 2.5 weeks' time. With the way that Munster were able to withstand that opening 25-minute barrage of attacks from Toulon, and the composure they showed then when they were really under pressure, when Chris Ashton had gone over for that try, and it would have been easy to drop their heads, but still they stood firm. They had that moment of magic. Do you reassess where Munster can go in this competition? Do you look at them and think, actually, maybe they could win this?
Well, I think the first thing, Nathan, is that Munster have done the entire competition a service by knocking Toulon out, because like Toulon are a phenomenal rugby team in so many ways, everything that Keith has just mentioned. So just to knock them out means that any of the 3 remaining teams can certainly go on and fancy their chances, or 4 remaining teams can fancy their chances. I think having done what they've done, I think Racing, certainly in the south of France, won't be as difficult to challenge as, say, Toulon would be. And the irony is, of course, Toulon are knocked out. So I think they can do it. And with the return of the midfield coming back, potentially, it'd be hard to see who won't get selected in that side. But certainly Scannell, I think, has just been a phenomenal season for him last couple of seasons. So all the injuries coming back will certainly benefit them hugely. But for me, the story the whole weekend was something deeper. It was how the provinces taught their way at very, very difficult times. When problems were presented to them, the Irish provinces uniquely, way ahead of Saracens. Like I point out, we did commentary of the Saracens game, but there's so many times I watched what Saracens did during the game that says, you're actually not playing very brightly. You're going through they're a phenomenal rugby team, obviously, but when Leinster presented problems to them, they really struggled. A couple of simple examples. Leinster got a really good solid wheel with Cian Healy coming up on the left-hand side. Saracens obviously had a preordained call and went against the wheel. So the number 8 picked and went the wrong way around this. It went the long way around the scrum. We mentioned it in commentary, but this is like any number 8 any footballing number 8 worth his salt would know you don't go against the wheel. And there's lots of examples. And certainly when Toulon and that interchange, I think we were speaking about that last week, where Bastereau and Ashton in particular just loiters in behind Bastereau, and when they scored that try, I said, okay, Toulon are now going to pull away because they have that in them. But Munster, true to form, saw a big problem and realised what they needed to do. And I think that the coaching structures made a difference, but you can't underestimate the cultural impact of what it is to play for Munster and play for Munster in Thomond Park, and the relentless never give in. And I think the 16th man, the crowd, realised it. Keith, if your heart was in trouble, my father at 83 was sitting in one of the seats. I gave him a ticket. I thought, if you were in trouble, my dad was definitely going to be in trouble, because to see the crowd and how it reacted and how it knew that we've a problem here, we need to solve it. And I think that's the story of the weekend for me. The Irish provinces seem to be able to embrace problems that they haven't quite prepared for and still figure it out. I think there's loads of examples in both fixtures.
That game management then, Liam, that smartness that they have on the pitch, the easy thing to do is to say, well, that comes from Joe Schmidt from the top and they're bringing it back to the provinces. But is it actually something deeper than that, something that's starting now at schools level, the players that are coming through at 18, 19, they have that sort of in their DNA?
Well, I've been banging on about it. I know Keith is a strong advocate of allowing people to play. Now, I'm not that familiar with the English system, but speaking to, over the Twickenham weekend, speaking to a lot of ex-English internationals who've now gone into coaching, and they seem to be obsessed at, say, the under-20 level at the professional structures and accountability around what a professional team should be doing, which in theory seems okay, but in reality, you're talking about 18, 19-year-olds, and you're kind of saying, don't expect these guys to be able to play a professional game. Allow them to make mistakes. In fact, encourage them to play. And certainly if you watch the Ireland 20s game against England 20s, you would have noticed that subtle difference between, and I haven't spoken to either coaching structures, but it seems to me that the Irish 20s were in a more friendly environment to express themselves, whereas the English, and I'm talking about this in my article tomorrow, about a key difference between James Ryan and Maro Itoje. There are only 2 years in the difference. One is 23, one's 21. Itoje is obviously a Lion, an international, a multi-capped international, but they approach a couple of scenarios in such a drastically different way. It tells me that the English system still seems to be rooted in beat the guy up in front of you, get a quick recycle, and then hand it out to your electric backs. And when it doesn't quite work, I think they're stumped. Whereas James Ryan doesn't have the same physical presence as maybe Itoje, and has to think his way around it. Now, I don't know, is that just because he came through St. Michael's or came through the Leinster system, or he's been encouraged by Joe Smith? But there seems to be quite a difference between how the Irish provinces are currently approaching challenges. And Andrew Conway's catch on the touchline was a classic example. Like he obviously clearly didn't give up, but he wasn't just satisfied with catching it, and off he went about his business when the opposition obviously quit.
Keith, we have seen in recent weeks the talents of your son in the Munster Schools Cup. So you're obviously aware of what sort of education and rugby education young players are getting. Do you get the sense, even at schools level, that players are really being taught the right thing in terms of how to manage a game, and that the skill set required is very different to maybe where it was 5-10 years ago?
I would say a lot of the skill level has improved considerably. I think a lot of that comes from coaches. A lot of it comes from the players themselves. Actually, a lot of the kids are incredibly analytical, are watching the game, and they're not watching to see whether Munster win or lose. They're watching to see the skills. It's like a trend you've seen, through all our kids. A different soccer. What are you doing? We're doing skills. We're doing special skills. We're doing every kind of flick over. They want to be able to do all those elements. They're beginning to do that a lot in rugby as well. I think we have to be careful not to say that, to run absolutely amok with everything being great and perfect in Ireland, because it's not. I do think the Leinster schools are ahead considerably in terms of promoting that level of talent, right? And I say that with a small bit of envy, and but any time that you have a bit of envy, it can be a catalyst to having a bit of change. And so, it's imperative that Munster, Connacht, Ulster take different steps, because it's always going to be different. The systems are just not the same, and that's a reality. That's not a criticism at all, but need to take different steps to try and make certain that the players that we have going through our system are going to be more skilled. But what I would say, and it's interesting, I spent 2.5 weeks in London over the last period of time, and had lots of conversations with different guys that I would know that I played with on the Lions or England, and spoke to a couple of teachers, and spoke to some parents, just kind of by the by. It wasn't anything organised, but the idea within the schools and within the academies in England is a bit different from Ireland. I mean, there's a big impetus in Ireland that if you go into one of the academies after you've left school, and it's after you've left school, it's sort of 18 years of age, not 16 years of age, which is often the case in some of the English academies. It is that you go and you learn your rugby and your skills, and you get bigger, stronger, fitter, faster, all that, but also that you try and get some further education. So an awful lot of the players that are going through are hand in hand with third level organisation or whatever it is, try and get a degree or diploma, and that leads to, I think, players that have a slightly different perspective. And if you go back to 25 years ago, when I started playing, to nearly 30 years ago, when I started playing in Garryowen, the idea of sitting in a room with people with similar thoughts wouldn't happen. Banker, accountant, builder, student, engineer, they were all around, they were all evident in a team room. And I think we're actually getting back to that a little bit. Yes, they're often students, but they're students that are taking up different disciplines. And I feel there's more, and there's still a huge amount more that has to be done to that. But we want to try and have as many independent thinkers on the field as we can possibly get, and not this automaton entirely weights driven forward, or very fast backs only. We want them to be able to think their way around the field, and I think that is something that Joe Schmidt has been very, very keen on. The players are responsible for all the things that they do, but they're responsible of having the preparation that's done, and that's a type of intelligence as well.
Eddie O'Sullivan said on Monday Night Rugby, Leinster now the best team in Europe without a doubt after their performance against Saracens last weekend. Would you go along with that, Eddie?
Who's Eddie? Which Eddie?
Eddie, Keith. I'm looking at it. Eddie O'Sullivan already said it. Keith, do you agree with him?
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I thought the games, I thought the quarterfinals over the weekend were brilliant. Every single one of them for different reasons. I thought there was some very poor refereeing in some of them, which I think skewed a couple of things as well. But the standout team in terms of composure, control, I would have said joy too. There was a fair bit of joy in Leinster's performance. Were Leinster. I thought they played fantastically well. I love the interplay between the young forwards. And I still, because I'm a front row forward, I still get excited when I see Tadhg Furlong, barreling into somebody when he has the ball, or making a tackle and being there for such huge amounts of it. I thought that was the most impressive performance. Saracens are a really, really good, very capable team. They're not as good without Billy Vunipola. I don't think any team would be, but you just see how reliant they are on him getting over the gain line. Without him, they're just not as good. But I thought some of the English guys looked a bit kind of knackered after the Six Nations. I don't think they were kind of flying constantly. They were playing well, but not as well or as fresh as the Irish guys were. I thought Leinster were just incredibly impressive.
Liam, you were part of the commentary team at the Aviva Stadium on Sunday. I know how impressed you were as well. It's now Scarlets at the Aviva Stadium on April 21st. It's a game we'll have live here on Off the Ball. There's a huge amount of confidence. The way Leinster plays, is there any risk of complacency going into that game?
I'm not so sure, Nathan, this particular game, because I think Leinster will remember their last time they got to play Scarlets in a playoff game, and we're in for a humdinger for a start, and we get bogged down at times statistically, but this could be a game where the ball just never leaves the park, because both sides are capable of trusting their defence and having huge confidence in their attack. I think this is going to be a cracking semi-final. It's going to be, obviously, it's a little harsh, the fact that from a Scarlet's point of view, it's hardly a neutral ground, which gives Leinster another added advantage in many, many ways playing the Aviva, because most of those players play for Ireland, and of course they're well used to the Aviva playing for Leinster there as well. So I think it's going to be a cracking game. I can't imagine for a moment that the entire Leinster environment would for a moment treat Scarlets without the absolute full-on respect. And for that reason, I think it's going to be a cracking game. I still think that Leinster are the team to beat. Once Toulon were knocked out by Munster, I think Leinster certainly are the team to beat.
Keith, I wanted to talk to you as well about some of the issues surrounding the Premiership over in England and how it will affect European rugby, because Saracens were the only team to reach the quarterfinals, then they're beaten, they've no representatives in the semi-finals, and maybe like what happened in Ireland over the last couple of years, suddenly the English teams and the English supporters are looking at it and thinking, well, it's starting to lose its aura, was what was brought up. And looking at some of the finances, so Saracens, we're hearing, has been put up for sale, that their South African co-owners want to put their stake up for sale. They recorded a loss of 2.74 million last year. Exeter Chiefs, the only one of the Premiership clubs not to operate at a loss last year, and the reaction to all that seems to be they're going to close shop, that they are going to try and get rid of relegation from the Premiership, so they'll have either a 12 or a 14 team Premiership with no relegation. Everyone's guaranteed a certain amount of money, and to add the extra games they want to take away from European rugby again, to possibly restructure the Champions Cup yet again. How do you see this playing out?
It's I was involved all those years ago, and I remember when the relegation idea came up, and just on a point of fact on there, Nigel Ray has actually taken back the 50% that Johan Rupert had in Saracens. They haven't put it up for sale. I think they've taken it back, and look, they're losing a huge amount of money all the time. I remember believing that it should have been ring fenced. I'm still of that view, and I know it isn't a particularly popular one, and I think you just need to have a capacity for somebody who is on a drive that wants to get up there from one of the lower divisions, that they have an entry point. That's what you're looking for, is an entry point into it, rather than the collapse out of the bottom of the league. I'm a big fan, and I've said this for a long time. I think that the most sustainable model that we could have is, I think if you called it a Lions league, which would be England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, playing on, I wouldn't have it on 2 tiers, I'd have it in 1 tier, but there may be 2 conferences with it. And then you can factor in the Lions, then you can factor in the Six Nations, then you can factor in the European competition. And there's method to that happening, and that's kind of come up again this week. I'd be slow to jump at that at the present moment in time, while England, being the only real team that don't have I would say, an equitable solution with their clubs of how they use their players. Now, I played at seasons in Harlequins. The most I played was 42 matches in one season, which is ludicrous to think. I averaged 36 or 7 for 4 or 5 years, and I had lots of injuries in that period of time. You can do those matches, you can play them, you just can't play well. And look, I've been really impressed with Maro Itoje. I think he's one of the great players in the world. But what he's had to deal with since he started playing international rugby is constant rugby with no break. And you can talk about welfare for forever, but until you actually start to do things that cater for it, there's no way you come back from a Lions tour and go straight into playing at the start of the season. I did that in 98, in 97, it nearly broke me. I didn't finish an international that year. My whole body went on the blink. It was dreadful stuff, and I was nowhere near as fit as these guys, and they just need a bit more of a break. And for that to happen, you have to stop trying to put the first 15 players out every minute of every day.
In some ways, Liam, it's hard to see that happening as the funding and the prize money continues to increase year on year. The new deal with BT Sport has seen a huge increase in funding for the Premiership. So the owners, who are all struggling to make any money as it is, they want to see those 15 there every week. They want to be able to drive up their revenue, and ultimately they don't seem to care a huge amount about what happens at international rugby, and even at times maybe not what happens with European rugby.
Yeah, I think I'm reminded of the phrase, never dance with the bear, because the bear decides when the music stops. And I think there's too much selfishness across the board, in the sense that what Irish rugby is about, it's got the centralised system. Obviously, there are a few top-down, and Scotland and Wales have similar approaches to it. And to try and get into bed with another group who have a completely different set of needs, I think it would be... You want to tread very, very carefully in that. The other thing is around the funding and the losses. I think there was a 20 million loss last year, but who really knows what the loss is? Because who knows what is actually being spent? And certainly there's all sorts of rumours around Saracens, around the amount of money that's being spent. And I don't know, is that being added up or accounted for in that sense? I personally be very slow, not out of selfish reasons, but out of protection reasons. And I don't mean that in a closed way. I just think that if the Irish rugby was to get involved in a type of league that is being suggested by that article and other articles, I think there'd have to be some serious conditions linked to it, because you've got two groups of bodies who are looking for two totally different things. And I do have sympathy for the English players who are playing so many matches. And I think one of the things maybe that might have changed, Keith, in the time you have played till now, is that the sheer size of the players has gone up again. And it seems to me that the priority isn't necessarily playing problem-solving rugby. It's about getting big enough. It's about, if you talk to any Irish guys who've gone across to the UK, they'll tell you that the first thing they have to do is put on 5 kgs or 7 kgs. 6.23 kgs is a stone. So just the physical size, it's so orientated towards big physical men, and I think that as a result they've lost sight of how to play the type of game that we're playing, because we don't maybe have the same level of pressures on that relegation concept. But I'd be very slow. I don't think, I think never the twain shall meet. We're talking about two totally different products, and unless we meet halfway in some sort of shape, I think it'd be silly to get into bed with them.
Yeah, Keith, where does the balance of power lie? Because on one side you look at the success of the Pro 14 teams in Europe this season and the success for the national teams as well, and think actually, well, maybe they're in a good position if they were entering negotiations, but at the same time all the money is coming into the Premiership from BT.
Well, that's one part of it, and I think you have to be wary of certain elements. Was it ITV Sport took over the soccer championship a few years ago and then pulled out after 2 or 3 years and put huge pressure on them, and if that was to happen, I think yes, there's other companies would come into play. The idea of getting in more money and then paying more wages or higher wages all the time so that you still have a loss still means that as a business structure it's slightly dysfunctional. And I would agree. I agree with Liam. Like I recommended this system about 6 or 7 years ago because I think it's something that is the closest element for us, rather than going over the globe to new markets to try and find ways of getting more money in. Is there not a better way of tidying up this? Now, that's the age-old argument since the game went professional, in that for a variety of different reasons, the RFU didn't get control of the game, and the clubs did. But it's not great for the clubs, and it's not great for England. So it's whether there are enough of people that are able to have a conversation, and yes, it might have to happen in a couple of years' time. It doesn't have to happen next week. But are there people that are willing to have a conversation that says that yes, we have an element of control, but we share some of the risk, maybe with the RFU, which is a very rich union, to try and see that the game can actually grow, and it isn't just done to that idea of survival, because that's where it's running at the moment. And I don't know that it's entirely right. So it's easier for players to pick a player from another country to play for the club team, knowing that he won't be playing for England. That's not the right space to be in. So there's some, like, we know that it isn't right. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it could be better, but it requires a huge level of negotiation and compromise to try and make that into a far more fluent system.
Liam, in terms of that potential Lions League that Keith will talk about down the line, it almost feels as though the Premiership owners, they go around every couple of years, try and come up with a new initiative to spark more interest, to drive up the television revenue, and if that doesn't work, they go back to the drawing board and try and think of something else. Eventually, do they just get to the stage where they realise, well, Leinster and Munster are successful, they're going to draw crowds in, maybe the Pro 14, maybe the link up there is the missing link, and Pro 14 over the next couple of years just try and get themselves into a position when those negotiations happen that they do have the upper hand?
Well, it depends, Nathan, how you define success, because success in Irish rugby is multifaceted. You know, it's driven by the Irish team, and obviously Torrance Down, the Irish team generates 70% of overall revenue, so that's the number one priority. And feeding into that is the provinces. Like, I don't know, I'm not privy to the conversations in English rugby, but it doesn't, there seems quite a disconnect between what the clubs want and what they deem as success, and what England want and what they deem as success. So there's an awful lot of in-house tidying up to be done based on their vision and their principles. I think that's the first starting point, is what is English rugby's vision over the next 10, 15 years? And interestingly, in all these solutions, it seems that Italian rugby is kind of thrown to the lions, and possibly parts of Scottish rugby and Welsh rugby as well. So I'm uncomfortable by it in many, many ways, because is it that English rugby want to cherry pick the best of what's available and be damned to the rest? And I think that's against the philosophy of what we've been trying to achieve in the Guinness Pro and down the years as well. I think the concept of it's not just good enough to develop Irish rugby, in a sense, it's important to develop the broader rugby beyond the home nations and into Italy, etc., etc. So I don't know, I'm uncomfortable with it, but it seems that the entire business model of English rugby seems to be flawed, and I can't believe that they've only lost 20 million. I can't believe that. I can't imagine that there's more out there, that owners are putting money in different ways, because they've got the salary cap, and is there ways around that as well?
Yeah, just before we wrap up then, Keith, is it inevitable that at some stage in the next decade we are going to see that Lions League?
I would hope, strangely, that the conversations would happen. Are they the type of conversations that behind closed doors and whisperings that already happen? Yeah, I think there's been I know that there's been little rumblings of that over the years. I've spoken to a few different guys myself in relation to it. Not that I've any influence on it, but I feel we have to stop at some stage talking about looking after players' welfare and actually do something about it. So I don't think we can continue to stretch the season. I don't think we can continue to have situations where you only have a week off before the next, coming back off of Six Nations, before you have a next big game in a European Cup. I just think the balance of it has gone somewhat over the last number of years. The game has become an awful lot faster, ball and play a lot longer. It's much harder and attritional on the players, and I think some of the rugby we're seeing is incredible. But I just think we need to be mindful of the fact we want, take the example, we want James Ryan and Dan Levy playing in 10 years' time. That's what we want. We want to see guys that are able to stand up, win a Grand Slam in their first year. We'd like to see them win a couple more, and you want to be able to hold on to those players. You're not going to do that playing 35, 40 games a year.
Keith, great stuff as always. Liam Toland, thank you as well for joining us for this very special Thursday Night Rugby. It will be back next Wednesday night as normal. Keith Wood and Liam Toland there. We're going to take a very quick break, then we're going to be talking about the Masters, and we will bring you up to date with all the latest Europa League as well.
Off the Ball on News Talk.
Every Friday on the Moncrief Show, we do movies. And we do booze. This week we'll be sampling Pascal Lapaccio Primitivo Salento and 2 tracks Sauvignon Blanc, as well as looking at what's new on the big screen, including Michael Inside and A Quiet Place.
Who are we if we can't protect them? We have to protect them.
Sure, what else would you want to do on a Friday?
Movies and Booze on Moncrief.
Proudly sponsored by Carry Out Off Licence.
This and every Friday on News Talk.
Are we nearly there yet? I need the loo. Ugh, those cows smell. Connor licked me. She pinched me. Stop looking out of my window. This crayon tastes funny.
Let's face it, we've all been on one of those long car journeys with the kids. But the good news is, with Sky Q, they can watch recordings anywhere. So you can let Peppa Pig do the hard work for a change. Sky Q, the next generation box.
Requires multi-screen subscription. Save selected recordings from last 90 days to compatible device connected to home broadband.
At Dunnes Stores, healthy eating is even easier with our Better Value 6. 6 fresh fruit and veg for only 49¢ each every week. This week's Better Value 6 includes butternut squash, garlic and butterhead lettuce. Plus, save even more with our €10 off every €50 grocery voucher. Dunnes Stores, always better value. Terms and conditions apply. See in store for details. Minimum spend required.
Off the Ball. This is News Talk.
You're welcome back. We will be across to Lawrence Donegan shortly to talk about the opening day of the Masters, where the defending champion, Sergio Garcia, has just hit 13 shots on the one hole.
Ouch.
On the 15th hole, the par 5, he essentially just gave up. The Masters champion has brought shame upon the green jacket in this great tournament.
Stop that now. Stop that. You've gone too far.
I actually thought it was just a repeat on repeat on repeat.
Yeah.
He just kept knocking it straight into the water. He gave up. And a 13 for Sergio.
Don't laugh. That's a champion you're laughing at. That's a champion.
8 over par for the one hole, and his defence is well and truly over. Tiger's on the 18th at the moment. I think he's 1 over par. Rory just dropped a shot. He's back to level par.
Yeah, we mentioned, Nathan, a little bit earlier on, just at the turn of the era that Conor McGregor could find himself on the wrong side of the law in New York. We're not talking about the Masters for a moment. This working class hero has got himself in trouble yet again. Dana White, the UFC president, said of what went down in the Barclays Centre this evening, it's the most despicable thing in UFC history. Brett Okamoto of ESPN asked White if he wants to be in business with McGregor anymore, and White's reply was, would you? This all results from an incident at the Barclays Centre. There was a press conference there earlier today which involved the headliners Max Holloway and Khabib Nurmagomedov ahead of UFC 223, which takes place there this weekend and will ultimately be for the belts that McGregor won but didn't defend back in November of 2016. This has led to McGregor turning up in New York over the course of the past 24 hours and being obviously aggrieved at the nature of being stripped of this lightweight belt.
Why is he aggrieved?
He thinks that it's his belt and he has every right to hang on to it. Why he thinks he would have every right to hang on to a belt that he won 18 months ago and hasn't defended or has made any noises about defending, I don't know where that logic would come into play, but it's McGregor's logic and McGregor's logic alone. We mentioned that scene earlier on that has been caught on film. Michael Chiesa, one of the fighters taking on Anthony Pettis on the card on Saturday, suffered a laceration to the forehead. This is all as a result of McGregor attacking the bus on which Chiesa and some other fighters were. It's believed he was targeting Nurmagomedov and potentially Artem Lobov, who's also been pulled by Dana White from Saturday's card as well as a result of everything that's gone down here. Chiesa suffered a laceration, as I said, to his forehead, and White says he's in hospital. White has also, in the past few minutes, been speaking about the situation directly involving McGregor.
There is a warrant out for Conor McGregor's arrest, and they're looking for him right now. His plane cannot take off. He cannot leave the state of New York with this warrant. They'll be grounded, and I'm assuming eventually, if they don't catch him, he'll turn himself in. You can imagine he's going to be sued beyond belief, and this was a real bad career move for him.
Indeed, I think Dana White's words there are pretty cut and dried. I can't imagine or envisage a scenario where McGregor's back.
Is anything cut and dried in this? Like, he says it's despicable, and he's asked, would you work with him again? He said, would you? Everybody's talking about the UFC once again.
They are, but they're talking about it for the wrong reasons.
But they're talking about it. They're talking about it, Reggie.
They are talking about it, but they're talking about it for exactly the reasons why this sport took so long to gain any credibility, especially within the United States.
Is this not the sort of stuff that got everybody interested in the first place?
The lawlessness of it got everybody involved, but it also put a lot of people off in terms of advertisers, investors, and people who would screen these things on pay-per-view. It took them a long time to work a lot of these people around. It took them a long time, let's remember, to get back into the city of New York. It's not long that they've actually been allowed to operate fights within New York, and for them so soon into that relationship being healed, for one of their star performers to behave in such a way is not something that's going to go down well with Dana White or the New York State Athletic Commission either. So this one is going to develop rather quickly over the course of the next 24 hours. As White mentioned there, McGregor, if there is a warrant out for his arrest, his plane won't be allowed to leave New York airspace. He's going to find himself in a fair bit of bother, and fairly quickly.
Does he fly Aer Lingus?
Is
this going to cause havoc for all the Irish people trying to get home?
I wouldn't say. I think he's probably got his own method of.
Is he at that level? He's at private jet level?
I'd say so, yeah.
I suppose, why not? And we're going to go to New York live at 9 o'clock to talk to Niall McGrath of Off the Ball and Severe MMA. He is there. He's at the scene. He can fill us in.
The cold face.
Just exactly how serious a situation this is. Should I start following Conor McGregor on Instagram again? Is that where all the action's going to be? I thought
he blocked you over what you'd sent him before.
So we're going to talk to Lawrence Donegan in a moment. Henrik Stenson and Charlie Hoffman are leading the way at the Masters, and Arsenal 4-1 up against CSKA Moscow, heading towards half-time in the first leg of the Europa League last 16 tie. We'll take a quick break.
Off the Ball on News Talk.
Imagine driving the stylish and intelligent Audi A3. Well, now you can from an incredible €249 a month. Makes you think, doesn't it? This limited offer has been extended to April 30th, so call your local Audi dealer today while stocks last. Audi. Vorsprung durch Technik.